Welcome to Talk Ottawa. Thank you for joining us. We're going to talk about the latest developments at City Hall and look ahead to all the issues that politicians will be grappling with this fall. We are joined by three members of Ottawa City Council, Councillor Alan Hubley, Councillor Mark Taylor, and Councillor Stephen Blair. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting. Thank you.
Let's talk first about the federal election, and we'll get to city issues in a moment, but does the outcome of this very close three-way race in federal politics, does it matter to the City of Ottawa, do you think? Do we have something at stake in the outcome of this election?
Absolutely. The city deals a lot with the NCC, for example. So who's going to be the leadership of the NCC, that impacts everything from LRT down to roads crossing through the Greenbelt. All big issues. We rely on infrastructure programs, for example. The mayor's been promoting the need for across the country to have more infrastructure money. So yes, the federal election makes a big difference for municipalities.
So I know that the federal government does, but ultimately does that mean it matters who wins? Or will life be different for the City of Ottawa depending on who wins this election?
Well, I think, you've got each one of the parties was asked to share their views on how they would see funding municipalities, and certainly the municipalities across the country haven't made any secret of explaining, as Alan said, how important infrastructure funding is to us. So each one of them has a different formula and approach to how they would fund infrastructure. So it certainly is important to municipalities who wins, and of course, it's also important, not just who wins, but also the form the government takes, because a lot of these funding commitments are made along multi-year lines. So the more stable the government, the more predictable a funding stream it is when we get involved in a major project.
Meaning minority parliament might be less stable and secure?
Well, minorities by their very nature are less stable and secure, but obviously the electorate will choose what they want. But I think that the signal that we would want to send, all municipalities would want to send to whomever won, is that even if there's a change as a result of a mid-course correction and another shift in power, municipalities would hope that funding that was committed to projects nationwide would remain in place no matter who was in charge.
What do you think, Stephen?
Yeah, certainly I think the party that forms the government will make a difference. Now, while three major parties are committed to infrastructure spending and transit spending, and they're all very similar in their approach, the pace of their investment differs depending on their budget framework, and also the realistic nature of their budget framework will help determine or not determine whether or not those promises of investment can actually materialize. In terms of the minority, again, it depends on the tone that the leading party or the governing party will take. If the approach is to try to secure support to get a majority government as soon as possible, then the investments in infrastructure will probably be smaller projects that can be delivered very quickly to increase popular support, as opposed to the investments we're looking for in Ottawa are much larger, much longer lasting, multi-generational type projects that will take longer to see the fruits of your labor for those commitments.
So the Conservative government made a commitment to fund Phase 2 of light rail, subject to some conditions, before the election campaign began. Will the other parties, if they form a government, be held to that commitment, or is that at risk if somebody other than the Conservatives gets elected?
As I understand it, the Liberals have made a comparable commitment. I'm not sure exactly the numbers and the timing, but very similar to what the government has announced. I'm not sure where the New Democrats stand, to be perfectly honest. But certainly, I think from Ottawa's perspective, light rail will be a game changer for our city, connecting east to the west, to the south, opening up economic development opportunities, connecting the two universities and Algonquin College together, and any government who decides not to fund light rail, I think will find themselves in trouble here in the city.
And I think that was the case when we looked at the provincial election, a cycle ago, and the provincial Progressive Conservative Party learned that lesson the hard way. I also think that because we're doing this in stages, with Phase 1 underway and Stage 2 ready to begin, half a system will not work. So, regardless of the color or stripe of the government that's in charge, I think they'll all realize It's a pox
Sure,
on all our
and
houses.
you can make the argument, obviously, here's why you need to support light rail, and you've been making that argument for some time, but ultimately, there will be budget pressure, there will be all kinds of other considerations. If a new government takes power, might there be some delay or interruption, or might there be the risk that they might not follow through on that commitment?
Well, I guess you're asking us to gaze into a crystal ball here. I think let's just get the election over with, and we'll talk to whomever is the government. And certainly our council and mayor will make a very good case as to why these are good investments for this area.
All right, let's continue to talk about transit because there's certainly lots to talk about in that area with light rail coming, and with the construction progressing and some of the changes to how people are getting downtown. There was an incident on the first day of the rerouting of buses around Herdman Station where there were some problems with that. Are you satisfied? You're the chair of the Transit Commission, of course, Stephen Bland. Are you satisfied that that's been taken care of and that the modeling issues that arose, the computer modeling issues that arose that maybe contributed to that problem, won't be a factor as you roll out future changes?
So in terms of the Herdman example, that issue was very unfortunate. Certainly we apologize to clients who were affected by it. And OC Transpo dealt with it very quickly. By that afternoon, the problems had been identified and solutions put in place. I've gone through it a few times. Things seem to be going well. The reports are that it's functioning very well. We're continuing to look at why exactly the model didn't predict to precision exactly what would happen at Herdman. It worked very well at Saint Laurent, at Blair, and along the rest of the transitway. And I think certainly there will be continued diligence as we move forward to the other changes to ensure that these types of things don't continue to arise.
Do any of you worry about the ridership numbers for OC Transpo and what they might suggest in terms of where ridership is going to be at 3 years down the road when light rail is introduced? Because it strikes me that when I hear about the plateauing of the ridership and in some years the decline that's happened, a lot of it has to do with factors that are not within the city's control, things like levels of employment in the federal government, the number of people working downtown, maybe even people taking their bikes more often, that type of thing. These are not things that over which you have control. You can change the fares, you can do a bunch of other things, but it's not going to change those factors. Are you worried that we won't hit the targets that are set for the preliminary and early long-range targets that are set for light rail traffic once Phase 1 is introduced?
That's going to be a big problem if that happens. You know, the studies are there. I worry about it because I see things such as, you know, they're saying the reduced number of employees at the federal level, but yet we have other reports out by like the Chamber of Commerce and others saying that the impacts are not quite what they're being projected as, because a lot of the reduction in the jobs were done through attrition, for example, and job trading, things like that going on. So it's not like, I think, coming back to the federal election, I saw something, one of the local candidates were trying to suggest 46,000 people have lost their jobs in Ottawa. Well, we would have noticed an impact like that. Like
sure.
the
but there's no question that
rate
the number
is
of people
not
working
climbing.
downtown for the federal government has
Right.
gone down. They're a core constituency of people who would be likely to take the bus. And it's probably going to go down even further in the future because a lot of the jobs are being moved outside the downtown core when for example, the Department of National Defense
has all kinds of new jobs coming
Yeah.
to it. It's a big growth area, but those numbers aren't going to be reflected in the LRT until the LRT comes out there.
Right.
You know, that's the beauty of Canada, is we have the two-way traffic. We have people trying to come out there to go to work, and we have the people from there trying to get downtown to go to other jobs.
But that, of course, is the benefit of light rail, is that it does go both directions. So, and it's easy to because it's going to be running both directions effectively at the same frequency. It's very easy to adapt to changes in where employment is based, as long as it's within that spine of the system. Which is why Stage 2 of LRT and an eventual extension further west is that much more important, to get the train that much closer to more people.
Right, but any public transit system, the heart of it is getting people downtown during rush hours, right, and getting them home again in the afternoon. Yeah. But somebody who, even if they work along a light, if they live downtown and they work in the West End, even if it's along a public transit system, they're probably a little bit more likely to take their car just because there isn't as much traffic going in that direction, and there might even be free parking where they're going. So it really is about getting people downtown, and there are going to be fewer people working downtown potentially. Does that put the model under threat for light rail?
I don't think so, because I mean, one of the things that, aside from the speed of LRT and the capacity of the people that it could carry, and I wish the ridership projections, you know, we could follow them year by year and they were linear, but it's not going to be like that. The other thing that LRT gives us is a certain nimbleness that we don't have in the system right now, right? We're using diesel buses and we're pointing them all in one direction, majorly at one point in the day, and all in another direction at the other point of the day. And we're kind of chasing the waves as you are. But when we move to LRT, the flexibility that we'll have with the buses that are not carrying all those passengers during the peak period will allow us to better service areas of the city. We'll be able to deploy a different framework around the city, so that if you have folks who are making local jaunts to employment hubs that are not in the downtown core, then they can be better serviced by bus than they are presently today.
As long as you maintain the same number of buses, right?
Yeah, I mean, and again, you know, there's going to be ebbs and flows, or peaks and valleys with the number of buses and operators that we have, but the goal is to try and marry that with the increase in demand.
Okay. We have much more ground to cover on the fall agenda at City Hall. We'll be right back on Talk Ottawa.
The communities along the Ottawa and St. Lawrence rivers have a lot to offer. Along with being home to our nation's capital, you produce clean, renewable power. That's good for our environment and economy. Ontario Power Generation, proud to call your communities home.
Join Jamie Ray Gomes for conversations with fascinating guests. One-on-one, Tuesdays at 7:30.
October 19th is Election Day, but it's not just about the party leaders, it's also about the candidates and local issues in your riding. Get to know the people running to be your MP. Watch the local campaign on Rogers TV and online at rogerstv.com. And tune in October 19th for the most comprehensive coverage of the local results in your riding. Rogers TV, the local focus on the federal election.
Kiwanis TV Bingo is only on Rogers TV, with 4 games every Monday night at 7. Help support the charities of the Kiwanis Club of Ottawa and your chance to win some cash too. Kiwanis TV Bingo, Mondays at 7.
As a volunteer at Rogers TV, you'll start with a mentor to find out where you'll be. Then expand on your talents and bring quality home. And maybe one day you'll run a show of your own.
Welcome back to Talk Ottawa. We're here with City Councillors Mark Taylor, Stephen Blais, and Alan Hubley, and we're talking about the fall agenda at Ottawa City Hall. We've been talking a lot about taxis and ride-sharing services in the last few weeks and months for a variety of reasons, including the dispute with regard to airport taxis and some incidents that have been caught on video, moments of confrontation that have concerned some residents of Ottawa and have concerned members of City Council too, I'm sure. So let's talk about that issue. Are any of you closer to the idea of embracing ride-sharing services now than perhaps you were when Uber first arrived in Ottawa?
Oh, absolutely.
You are?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, I liken it to somebody that has a Blockbuster franchise. Things are changing. Like, you know, the new services are coming on board whether we like it or not. But what we need to do is make sure that we create a level playing field for everybody involved. And so the taxi industry as it was will need to evolve. We're going to have to help them with that and accommodate a ride-sharing service that can be safe for the public to use.
So in your analogy, obviously the taxi drivers are Blockbuster.
The taxi system today
Right.
is, I'm comparing to the Blockbuster franchise of a few years ago, you know?
Yeah.
It used to be the busiest place in the neighborhood. Everybody was
Sure.
going there. Now there's none left, right? Or none that I'm
Well, you can understand how, and I'm not saying you have the wrong analogy, but that would be scary to a taxi driver to hear you as a city councillor saying that.
But the
and
people that
saying-
worked at Blockbuster are still working. They're just doing a different type of job today, to further that analogy. So the drivers don't need to be worried. We're always going to need drivers. It's the business itself that I see is evolving. So
Okay.
for example, the airport is a great example of how things can evolve, because now they're talking about Blue Line being the dispatch system out there, and they will make their money by running the dispatch piece, and the drivers will all make their money based on the number of rides that they do. So to me, it's evolving in a good way. I think personally, I think we're a little slow in getting in there to do the whole review piece. Toronto did it over the summer. We should be moving a lot faster on that.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, I happen to agree. I'm not sure why it's taking so long to do the review. I'm torn. It's not ride sharing when you surge your pricing for market demand and you can get a random stranger at your door at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's not me calling up a buddy and asking to carpool together. So I understand why the frustration from the taxi industry, but at the same time, their business model has lagged, and their company hasn't invested in the technology that makes Uber so attractive from a convenience perspective. I find it, Intact Insurance has announced that they're going to come up with an insurance product to deal with ride sharing that'll be probably, I would imagine, higher price than personal insurance, but probably lower than commercial. As regulations come around it, I find it hard to believe that they'll be able to keep the pricing model the same. And it's almost like, if you're a really good cook, are you going to invite people to your house and charge them to make them a really nice dinner and expect that the health department and other people aren't going to want to know that your kitchen is clean and you're following certain basic guidelines and regulations that we have in place for the restaurant industry? And so there needs to be a framework around it to protect everyone who's involved. The taxi industry is going to have to evolve, to be sure, but the tactics that Uber has employed is not akin to someone who wants to be a productive member of a community.
But at the same time, you seem to be saying you're open-minded to the idea that this is where the future is, and even if it's not exactly as it looks now, it's that in all likelihood these services are here to stay.
Oh yeah, I think they're here to stay. I think the technology is great. You certainly can't beat the price, but I think that will shift as people become professional Uber drivers.
Yeah.
Their need for a higher price will go up because they're not going to have their other job to be paying the bills. So there will be at some point a balance struck, but it'll take some time, I think.
Yeah.
A couple of things strike me. First and foremost, I was and still am somewhat of an outspoken critic of Uber, but it was never an aversion to the technology. I think the technology is great. It was an aversion to how they chose to enter the marketplace. They talk a very good game about ride sharing, but as Steve pointed out, nothing's being shared when it's one stranger charging another stranger. That sounds like commerce to me. I think that the model will evolve for sure, but the study that Toronto did, two things really kind of bubbled to the top right away. Number one was that people wanted to understand that they were insured when they were in Uber, and that is going to force prices of Uber rides to go up. And secondly, people in Toronto at least believe that there was already some kind of oversight or regulatory framework in place for Uber, which there is not. So there's obviously a desire on behalf of the public to have that. I think the drivers and the model will change in Ottawa, but as Steve said, I think as it does, prices will start to rise as well. And if you divorce the concept of Uber from the technology that it uses, when we rewind the clock to the beginning of the internet generation, there were lots of companies out there. Netscape was out there, AOL was out there. They're not all still with us today, right? So
right, but I guess, and maybe, what, we'll take a quick break. We'll come back and talk more about this and other topics on Talk Ottawa. We'll be right back.